What's good, y'all boys? Oh, hold on. There you go. What's good, y'all boys? Welcome back again to another video. It's your boy, Boss Enosch. Yes, sir. Appreciate you for clicking on the video. If it's your first time, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. So look, I've been getting some comments from some of y'all asking me to react to Thomas Sowell. Pretty sure that's how he says his last name. Sowell. It's not Sowell. Sowell. And so look, I know who he is. I've seen at least one or two videos of his before, so I'm not completely unfamiliar in what he believes and what he says. But you know, I'm no historian on everything that he talks about. So we're gonna see what's up, and we're gonna see if we agree or disagree with anything that he says in this video. I might do a couple of these, you know, see if people like him or not. I saw a couple people reacting to him for the first time, so it must be pretty. And it was black people too, black creators reacting to him. So maybe his message is resonating. We gonna see right now. Alright, y'all ready? Are you ready? Facts about slavery never mentioned in school. Tom, so I wonder if he's still alive.
The instrumental use of the history of slavery today also underlies the claim that slavery grew out of racism. For most of its long history, which includes most of the history of the human race, slavery was largely not the enslavement of racially different people, for the simple reason that only in recent centuries has either the technology or the wealth existed to go to another continent to...
Right, people couldn't sail, yeah. Okay, yeah, slavery been existed, yep. Even in the Bible, they talk about slavery.
Get slaves and transport them en masse across an ocean. People were enslaved because they were vulnerable, not because of how they looked. The peoples of the Balkans were enslaved by fellow Europeans, as well as by the peoples of the Middle East, for at least 6 centuries before the first African was brought to the Western Hemisphere.
600 years.
Before the modern era. By and large, Europeans enslaved other Europeans. Asians enslaved other Asians. Africans enslaved other Africans.
Yeah, it's similar to when people talk about black on black crime and stuff like that. Well, it's likely that people commit crime on the people that they're around. You know what I'm saying? So in a black neighborhood, they're mostly around black people, so they're going to be robbing, shooting, killing other black people. In a poor white neighborhood, they're around other poor white people, so they're going to be robbing, shooting, killing other white people. It is what it is.
And the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere enslaved other indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. Slavery was not based on race, much less on theories about race. Only relatively late in history did enslavement across racial lines occur on such a scale as to promote an ideology of racism that outlasted the institution of slavery itself. Wherever a separate people were enslaved, they were disdained or despised, whether they were different by country, religion, caste, race, or tribe. In East Africa, the Maasai were feared slave raiders, and other African tribes, either alone or in conjunction with Arabs, enslaved their more vulnerable neighbors. As late as 1891, it was reported that Manyuema slavers had demoralized surrounding tribes, destroying crops, and famine reigned everywhere. Even in the early 20th century, Abyssinians were still raiding other Africans and carrying off slaves. It was 1922 before the British had gained sufficient control in Tanganyika to stamp out slavery there. Arabs were the leading slave raiders in East Africa, ranging over an area larger than all of Europe. The total number of slaves exported from East Africa during the 19th century has been estimated to be at least 2 million. The form in which the story of slavery has reached most people today has been along the lines of the best-selling book and widely watched television miniseries Roots by Alex Haley.
Okay.
Challenged on the historical accuracy of Roots, Haley said, "I tried to give my people a myth to live by. This instrumental use of history, or purported history, is open to the same objections as other instrumental myth-making."
I wonder what he means by that, a myth to live by. I mean, we already understand that slavery is bad and there's a lot of crazy shit they did in slavery. Yes. Maybe I need to rewatch Roots. What was in there that wasn't historically accurate? Maybe if y'all have it more fresh in y'all head, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of weird to say that. You know, I want to make a myth for my people to live by. What do you mean a myth? It's not a myth. It's history. What are you talking about?
Fight the impression created by Roots during the era of the massive slave trade from West Africa a white man was more likely to catch malaria in Africa than to catch slaves himself. The average life expectancy of a white man in the interior of sub-Saharan Africa at that time was less than 1 year. By and large, men from Europe or the Western Hemisphere came to the coasts of Africa, bought their slaves, and left as soon as possible.
Oh, okay, I see. So saying it wasn't really that many white Europeans that would go into Africa. They just go to the coast. You know, Roots probably didn't show the other Africans that was selling Africans. That's probably what he's talking about. They didn't show that. Okay, I think I get it. They just emphasized on white people trying to capture black people, not showing every angle to it. Okay, I get it.
Even so, the death rates among the white crews of the ships carrying slaves to the Western Hemisphere were as high as the death rates among the slaves themselves. It was only much later, after quinine and other medical measures enabled Europeans to survive where there were tropical diseases, was it possible for them to invade Africa in force and establish empires there.
Okay, when did they do that?
The Atlantic slave trade had already been ended.
Yeah, the Atlantic slave trade was ended in 18 something, maybe 1805. Let's see. It was abolished 1807. Okay, yeah. I mean, there's still people that was doing it, but they were doing it illegally. And I think there was British soldiers and like other soldiers that would, that would stop slave traders and shit like that. But hold on, he said white slave traders died just as much as the slaves did on the trip to America. Hold on, 'cause I never heard that before. I'm sure some people got sick and died because them ships was dirty as hell. They was dirty and stanky and nasty, and that was all below. So you think it didn't spread to where the white people was sleeping at too? Shit's nasty as hell. Let's see. Okay, that detail seems like the type of thing that I would I'd have to really dig into to find. You know what I'm saying?
During the era of that trade, Africa was largely ruled by Africans, who established the conditions under which slave sales took place. The crew of a slave ship was in no position to defy African rulers and their armies by going out across the land and capturing people willy-nilly. The stronger African peoples captured and enslaved the weaker peoples. The same pattern found over the centuries in Europe, Asia, the Western Hemisphere, and Polynesia.
Yeah.
Enosch,
everybody's doing that shit.
Ngoni and Yall swaggered over and terrorized other tribes.
The Homie
Uganda,
tribe that they just made a movie about
made life miserable for their neighbors. And the Nyoro and Hima of Anko enslaved Toro women and children. The Tutsi dominated the Hutu in Rwanda. The Maasai lorded it over the Kikuyu and Kamba. And the latter, in turn, held the Indorobo in a kind of serfdom. It was precisely the fact that Europeans...
Yeah, I remember being in high school and middle school, and I remember, I can't tell you vivid memories like verbatim, but I remember when people would talk about it, and they would say, or I would hear, whether it be in real life or like maybe on TV or whatever bullshit, and people say, "Oh, well, black people sold slaves too," and that would be disregarded, right? They would disregard that statement, as if trying to escape or move away, deflect from white people's role in slavery and racism. But I mean, it is a valid point. It is a valid point. The details matter. The details, everything matter, including history. Now, that doesn't take away from the atrocities that was done to black people, duh. But it is an important detail. And it goes to show you, just because motherfuckers got the same skin color don't mean it's all unity. Even in present day. Look at black people today, since we're talking about black people. There's constant division between different neighborhoods, different blocks, different backgrounds, FBA versus immigrants, or they like to call them tethers, you know what I'm saying? Caribbeans. You see, you see it all the time, division. There's no unity. A lot of people like to try to portray this sense of unity. Oh, we're all black people, we're all together, woo woo woo. But that's never been true. It hasn't been true for anybody. Even white people try to do that. White pride, all the white people stand together, da da da. Even white people don't be all like all buddy just because they're white. Only the certain ones that do, right? The supremacist type shit. But no, because it's different types of white people. There's Italians, there's Russians. There's, you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of different white people. The Swedish people. You know what I'm saying? Let's go on.
Except for the Portuguese, seldom participated in the raids that captured and enslaved Africans that enabled most people in Europe and the Americas to remain oblivious to the traumatic experience that this was, with some Africans committing suicide to avoid capture and wives being whipped as they tried to cling to their husbands or children. Historian David Breon Davis pointed out that Europeans had little contact with the actual process of enslavement, and that as late as 1721, the Royal African Company asked its agents to investigate the modes of enslavement in the interior. Europeans typically saw only the end results, enslaved people being offered for sale on the coast. It was much the same story in the Ottoman Empire, where those who bought slaves had no idea what these slaves had been through before. The unique position of the Western world in the history, and especially the destruction of slavery, need not imply that there was unanimity within the West on this institution. In addition to whites who defended the enslavement of Africans on racial grounds, or who opposed general emancipation on social grounds, there were many whites, and even blacks, who defended slavery as a matter of self-interest as slave owners. Although,
so greedy people is what it comes down to. Greedy people that was okay with the exploitment and pain and torture of people as long as it filled their pockets. Sounds familiar, right? Don't we see that today? Don't we see that in the food industry, the medical industry? You know what I'm saying? Big pharma, you know what I'm saying? They will prioritize lining their pockets over taking care of people. You dig what I'm saying? Every time they put all these chemicals in our food because it's cheaper and easier to make. Who cares about the long-lasting effects? Who cares? You know what I'm saying? It doesn't matter. As long as we get our dollar. So look how history repeats itself. All these themes, all these familiar traits in human beings. Happens back then, it happened back then, it happens today, it will happen in the future, right?
most black owners of slaves in the United States were only nominal owners of members of their own families. There were thousands of other blacks in the antebellum South who were commercial slave owners, just like their white counterparts. An estimated 1/3 of the free persons of color in New Orleans were slave owners, and thousands of these free persons of color in New Orleans were slave owners, and thousands of these slave owners volunteered to fight for the Confederacy during the Civil War.
To be fair, right? To add some nuance, well, not even to be fair, just giving you more information, because I remember I read about this, I looked it up before. Black people did own slaves. However, a majority of those black people that owned slaves, they weren't really like plantation owners. Go pick that cotton there. They weren't those type of slave owners. A majority of the slave owners were people, black men who were freed, and in order to rescue their wife and their children, they had to own them. They had to buy them. They couldn't set them free. They had to purchase them. So that's where some of the numbers get filled up for black slave owners. But there were black plantation owners that had slaves, was whooping them slaves. And matter of fact, some of them was treating them worse than some of the white people. You know what I'm saying? Because it was just so, you know, abusers become the abused all the time. And that's facts. But I definitely wanted to throw that in there about the slave owner bit, because I feel like a lot of people don't know that, actually. Because even when I read that, like, I was like, duh, it makes sense. But you don't really, sometimes you know something, but you don't really realize you know it until you read it. It's like, oh, duh, like, duh. You know what I mean? Duh.
Black slave owners were even more common in the Caribbean. In short, there were many defenders of slavery in the West, even in the 19th century. And outside the West, slavery was too widely accepted to require defense. No other nation ended slavery in the same way as the United States did, and few ended it after so short a struggle, as history is measured.
That's true.
How and why did slavery end in most of the world? There were two major processes. Over the centuries, as more and more territories around the world consolidated into nation-states with their own armies and navies, raiding those territories to capture and enslave the people who lived within them became more hazardous in itself, and also risked military retaliation against the countries from which the raiders came. Thus, more and more peoples became off-limits to slave raiders over time. Put differently, the areas which remained subject to slave raiding over the centuries were primarily those where the people lived in smaller or weaker societies.
Pretty much the strong eats the weak. That's what it comes down to.
Such societies continued to exist where it was difficult, for geographic or other reasons, to consolidate large areas under one government. This was true of the Balkans, the backwaters of Asia, and much of sub-Saharan Africa. By the early modern era, sub-Saharan Africa, with its numerous and severe geographic handicaps, was one of the last remaining areas from which vast numbers of people could be enslaved.
All right, so look, those are facts about slavery that I think that's pretty accurate. You know, in school, I don't think they barely mention that other black people owned slaves, other black people sold black people. Excuse me. They barely mention or distinguish how rough different slave traders treated black people, right? Like the Portuguese. You know, I don't think they really dove too much in detail. But again, I don't remember. It was a minute ago. I don't remember verbatim exactly how detailed they went. But I know there were certain things that were left out. Babe, that's Thomas Sowell. That's from Thomas Sowell's book. Let me know what y'all think below. Should I react some more? Or drop it or whatever y'all think that was enlightening? You know, because a lot of people don't know some of this stuff. But hey, I appreciate y'all for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, share, comment, hit the notification bell down below so you can get notified straight to your phone when I drop these videos. You feel me? Make sure you go in the description box and join the Discord, download TubeBuddy, all that. I appreciate y'all, and I'll see you in the next one.